Hey, welcome to our channel. Make sure to subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss our latest content.
If you had asked anyone, they would have told you Caleb and I had the perfect marriage. From the outside, we were a carefully constructed masterpiece. We were the kind of couple that made others believe in love again. Caleb was steady, kind, a man whose quiet confidence was the anchor to my more restless energy. For 8 years, 5 of them as husband and wife, we had built a life that was both beautiful and functional. We split the bills down the middle, shared a passion for old movies, and made plans for the future over takeout on rainy Tuesday nights. Our laughter was easy, our routines comfortable. We were a story written with care. But every story has a narrator, and mine was becoming increasingly unreliable, even to myself. What no one saw, what even Caleb couldn't see, was the silent conflict growing inside me like a vine, wrapping itself around my heart and squeezing, gently at first, then with an unyielding pressure. The conflict had a name: motherhood. For a long time, I managed to push it aside. It was a problem for a future version of myself, a decision to be made when the conditions were perfect. It's not the right time yet, I'd say, both to others and to the reflection in the mirror. My career needs my full attention. Our apartment is too small for another life. We still have so much to do, just the two of us. The excuses were plausible. They were even true, to an extent. But they were also a shield. Then, the questions started coming more frequently. At first, they were whispers during gatherings with friends, wrapped in jokes. "So, Eliza, when are you going to give this guy a promotion to dad?" They'd laugh, nudging Caleb, who would just smile that patient, handsome smile of his. Then, they became echoes at family lunches, veiled expectations served alongside the Sunday roast. My mother-in-law's gaze would linger on me a moment too long, a look that spoke louder than any words. It was a look of anticipation, of a promise she felt was owed. And Caleb never demanded anything. He never once said, "Eliza, I want a baby." But his silence on the subject began to feel heavier than any direct pressure. It was a quiet, constant presence in our home, a space in our conversations that we both meticulously avoided. I saw it in the way he looked at our friends' children, a soft, wistful expression that he would quickly hide when he caught me watching. His silence was a question I didn't know how to answer. I started to feel a sense of dread creeping into the corners of my life. I found myself imagining what it would mean to give it all up. The freedom. The spontaneous last-minute trips we used to love, the quiet nights when I could just fall asleep after a movie, without interruptions. The very structure of my identity, which I had worked so hard to build, my career, my independence, my sense of self, felt threatened. I was afraid of disappearing. I was terrified of dissolving into the figure of a woman who only serves, who only takes care, who only gives, until there is nothing left of the woman she once was. It was a fear I couldn't name, a shapeless anxiety that settled in my chest like a persistent discomfort. During work hours, I tried to lose myself in deadlines and client meetings. I poured everything I had into my projects, hoping the hum of productivity would drown out the turmoil in my mind. But it was always there, a low-frequency hum beneath the surface of everything. It was on one of those particularly confusing days that I accepted Liam's invitation to have lunch. It was nothing, really. Just 2 coworkers with projects in common, stepping out of the office for an hour. Liam was smart, driven, and had an easygoing nature that put people at ease. We had worked together for months, but our interactions had always been professional, efficient. But as we sat across from each other in a small, sunlit cafe, something shifted. There was a lightness in that moment that I hadn't felt in a long, long time. Away from the pressures of the office, and even further from the unspoken pressures at home, I felt like I could finally breathe. And for some reason, I started talking. The words just tumbled out of me, a confession I didn't even know I was holding. I talked about the pressure, the fear, the feeling of being trapped by expectations I never agreed to. I talked about the silence at home. And Liam, he just listened. He didn't offer solutions. He didn't judge. He didn't tell me I was overthinking it. He just listened, his eyes attentive, his expression one of genuine empathy. He nodded, he asked a question here and there, but mostly, he just held the space for my words. And for the first time in weeks, maybe months, I felt my shoulders relax. The simple, profound act of being heard was like a release valve for the pressure that had been building inside me. It was enough. For now, that lunch was a crack in the dam. The simple act of being heard opened a door I didn't realize was closed. What followed wasn't a sudden, dramatic affair. It was quieter, more insidious. It was a slow burn, built on small, seemingly insignificant moments. A coffee before a team meeting. A text exchange in the late afternoon about a difficult client, which would then drift into a silly comment that made me laugh out loud at my desk. A shared glance of understanding across a crowded conference room. These were small moments. Tiny pockets of relief in a life that was beginning to feel suffocating. I didn't seek this out. I swear I didn't. I didn't wake up one day and decide to open myself up emotionally to another man. I loved my husband. I loved the life we had built. But amidst the whirlwind I was facing alone, Liam offered something Caleb wasn't. Something I hadn't even known I was starving for. Genuine, undivided attention. Sometimes, what weighs most on the soul isn't a great tragedy, but the slow, crushing absence of someone who sees you beyond the roles life imposes. To Caleb, I was a wife. To my in-laws, a potential mother. To my colleagues, a project manager. With Liam, for a few stolen minutes a day, I was just Eliza. With Caleb, I shared a home. With Liam, I was beginning to share what I was actually feeling. And that, even though it seemed so small, became a dangerous bond. I started to notice things. The way the hallway conversations lingered a little longer than they should. The way a polite good morning began to carry a different intensity. There was a mutual curiosity growing between us, almost silent, but so clear it felt like a static charge in the air whenever we were close. I tried to push the thoughts away. I tried to convince myself that this was just a temporary fantasy, a harmless distraction, a reflection of the turbulent time I was going through. This isn't real, I told myself. This is just about feeling seen. It doesn't mean anything more. But the truth was, every brief encounter with Liam made me feel more alive, more noticed, more myself than I had felt in months. He didn't know the version of me who was afraid and confused. He only knew the confident, capable woman at work, and the vulnerable person who trusted him with her fears. And he seemed to value both. And over time, the line I had drawn so carefully in the sand, the line between an emotional connection and a physical one, began to dissolve. It happened after a long day. We were the last two in the office, staying late to finalize a critical report. The building was quiet, wrapped in the hushed, artificial glow of fluorescent lights. The silence of the empty office made space for conversations that, in any other context, would have been cut short by the presence of others. We talked about our pasts, our dreams, the things we were afraid to admit to anyone else. I felt a sense of intimacy with him that was both thrilling and terrifying. As we stood by my desk, gathering our things to leave, there was a pause. The air thickened. He looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw a reflection of the same longing and confusion that I felt. And then, he leaned in. It was a kiss. A quick, unexpected gesture, but it was charged with all the unspoken tension that had been building for weeks. My mind screamed no, but my body, starved for a connection that wasn't fraught with unspoken expectations, betrayed me. I leaned into it. That kiss became the trigger. It was like a dam breaking. All the feelings I had been suppressing, all the loneliness and fear, came rushing to the surface. One moment of weakness led to another, and we found ourselves in the company's empty meeting room, the city lights twinkling through the glass walls like distant, unblinking eyes. It was a moment, just that, a single, catastrophic moment born of loneliness and desperation. But it was enough to leave me completely, utterly shattered inside. I drove home on autopilot, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. When I walked through the door of the home I shared with Caleb, the air felt thick, heavy with my deceit. He was in the kitchen, humming along to the radio, preparing dinner. He looked up and smiled at me. "Hey, you, long day?" I couldn't speak. I couldn't look him in the eye. The guilt was a physical thing, a crushing weight in my chest that made it hard to breathe. Exhausted, I managed to choke out, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. I rushed past him, went upstairs, and stood under the scalding water of the shower, scrubbing my skin as if I could wash away what I had done. I lay in bed that night, silent, turned away from him, pretending to be asleep. I tried to convince myself that I could fix this, that I could pretend it never happened, that there was still time to turn back, to erase that moment from my memory and move forward. But the problem with choices is that they don't disappear. They take up residence in your body, in your mind. They live in your involuntary expressions, in the shadows under your eyes. And my body was already starting to betray the secret I so desperately wanted to hide. The days that followed were a special kind of hell. I was living inside a movie without sound, going through the motions of my own life. I smiled, I worked, I made dinner, but inside, time was frozen, replaying that one single moment in the meeting room over and over again. The kiss, the touch, the overwhelming, suffocating guilt. Caleb continued with his usual routine. He talked about a new project at work. He made plans for us to visit his parents on the weekend. He was so normal, so oblivious. Every kind word he said, every casual touch, was like a hot coal against my skin. Each gesture was a reminder of the life I had so carelessly risked, of the good man I was betraying with every breath I took. I tried to act as I always had. I responded to his messages, organized the house, kept the same pace at work. But something was off. My gaze would linger on nothing. My hands would hesitate over simple tasks. I was a ghost in my own home. Caleb, without knowing exactly what was wrong, began to slowly create a distance between us. It was the cautious retreat of someone who feels a change in the atmosphere but doesn't have the courage to ask what storm is coming. The easy laughter faded. The comfortable silences became tense. The facade began to crumble on an ordinary Sunday, during a visit from my mother. We were sitting at the kitchen table. She was telling a story about a neighbor, and I was staring into my coffee cup, trying to appear engaged. In a pause between her words, she stopped, her gaze sharpening on my face. "You seem strange, Eliza," she said, in that direct way only mothers have. Distant. "Is everything okay between you and Caleb?" I tried to deflect with a forced smile. "Everything's fine, Mom. Just tired from work." But the question kept echoing, and there, in that moment, as I avoided her eyes, I realized I couldn't hold it in anymore. The weight of what I had done, alone, was going to crush me. That night, I lay awake long after Caleb's breathing had evened out into a deep sleep. I spent the night thinking about how to tell him. I constructed entire sentences in my mind, imagining his reactions, playing out a dozen different scenarios, each one ending in disaster. I even got up and wrote them down on a piece of paper, trying to organize the chaos in my thoughts. But every word seemed too fragile, too inadequate. There was no way to justify it. There was no way to make it sound better than it was. And a terrified part of me believed that if I said the words out loud, the perfect life I had built with Caleb would collapse into dust. Even so, I knew hiding it was no longer an option. The deceit was a poison, and it was killing everything, slowly, from the inside out. 2 days later, Caleb came home early from work. He found me sitting on the sofa in the living room, staring at the blank television screen. The house was silent. "Hey," he said, his voice hesitant. "You okay?" This was it. "Caleb," I said, my own voice trembling so badly I barely recognized it. "Can you sit down? I need to talk to you." He saw the look on my face. The casual demeanor dropped away. He stopped what he was doing and sat in the armchair across from me, his expression wary, his eyes searching mine for an answer to a question he hadn't yet asked. I took a deep, shuddering breath. And then, I began to speak. The words came out in a broken, halting rush. I told him how confused I'd been feeling for months. I told him about the fear of becoming a mother, of losing my identity, and how it had become a daily anguish. I talked about the emptiness, about how everything felt suffocating. And then, with a voice that was barely a whisper and eyes overflowing with tears, I confessed. I got involved with someone else. I didn't say the name. I couldn't bring myself to. The omission felt like a final, pathetic attempt to control the damage, but the core of the truth was out. I told him it was someone from work, a moment I hadn't planned, something that happened amid the internal chaos I was experiencing. I regretted it instantly. I sobbed, the words tearing at my throat. From the second it happened. I've been blaming myself every single minute since that day, Caleb. I am so sorry. I'm willing to face whatever consequences come, but please, just listen to me until the end before you make any decision. I finally dared to look at him, pleading. Caleb remained silent. There was no expression on his face, no anger, no sadness, just a fixed, vacant gaze, as if he was trying to process a language he didn't understand. It was the most terrifying reaction I could have imagined. I would have preferred yelling, screaming, anything over this chilling emptiness. When I finished speaking, my confession hanging in the air between us like a thick fog, He didn't ask a single question. He didn't ask who. He didn't ask when. He didn't ask why. He just stood up. He walked to the small table by the door, picked up his car keys, and without another word, without a single glance back at me, he walked out. I heard the sound of the front door closing with a soft, final click. I remained motionless on the couch, unable to react. Then, a wave of cold reality washed over me, and I collapsed, folding in on myself, breathing in ragged, uneven gasps. I had laid all my cards on the table, and now, I was left with nothing but the devastating weight of his silence. Caleb didn't come home that night. My frantic calls went to voicemail. My long, desperate text messages pleas for him to just talk to me, to scream at me, anything were delivered, but left unread. The silence from his end was an answer in itself. A definitive, deafening roar. He drove for hours. I found out later from his brother. Aimlessly. He didn't want to talk to anyone. He checked into a random motel on the outskirts of the city, just to have a space where the air wasn't thick with my betrayal. He spent the night awake, replaying 8 years of our life together, trying to pinpoint the exact moment it all started to crumble without him noticing. When he finally returned home the next day, he was a stranger. He avoided my eyes, his movements stiff and deliberate. He walked past me as if I were a piece of furniture. "Caleb, please," I begged, following him into the bedroom. "Please, just talk to me. Let me try to explain." "There's nothing to explain, Eliza," he said, his voice flat, devoid of any emotion. It was worse than anger. It was nothing. "I need some time." He packed an overnight bag with a few essentials. "Where are you going?" I asked, my voice cracking. "I don't know. I just can't be here right now." He left again. In the days that followed, I descended into a frantic panic. I sent long emails, pouring out every ounce of my shame and regret. I tried to explain that it wasn't about feelings for someone else, that it was about my own brokenness, that all I wanted was a chance to rebuild what I had so carelessly destroyed. But for Caleb, one thing stuck in his mind, a detail that hurt more than the act of betrayal itself: my omission, my refusal to name the other man. To him, this meant I was still protecting Liam. It meant there was still something there, a loyalty that no longer belonged to him, and that single detail cut deeper than the infidelity. It turned a desperate mistake into a calculated choice. He slept elsewhere, at his brother's place, claiming he needed space. I held on to a sliver of hope, believing that once the initial shock wore off, we could have a real conversation. A fight, a truce, anything. But Caleb had already made his decision. On an ordinary Wednesday afternoon, while I was still at work, staring blankly at a spreadsheet, he returned to the house. Discreetly, he let himself in with his key, walked straight to our bedroom, and began to gather his life. He did it all silently, methodically. He packed his clothes, his personal belongings, his important documents. He separated his books from our shared shelves. He took his laptop. He took an old, framed photo of him with his parents that he always kept in his nightstand drawer. In less than an hour, everything that was solely his was packed into 2 suitcases. Before leaving, he walked into the kitchen. He placed his house key on the granite countertop, a small, metallic object that suddenly seemed to represent the end of everything. He looked around the house one last time, the home we had chosen together, and walked out the door. He didn't leave a note. He didn't send a message. When I got home that evening, the house felt strangely quiet. I called out his name, a hopeful, foolish sound in the empty space. When there was no answer, a cold dread began to seep into my bones. I walked into our bedroom and saw it. The partially empty closet, the open, vacant drawers on his side of the dresser. And then I saw the key on the kitchen table. My heart didn't just sink, it plummeted. I understood immediately. This wasn't him taking space. This was him leaving. For good. The final, brutal confirmation arrived 2 days later. It came not as a phone call or a letter, but as an email. The sender was a law firm I didn't recognize. The subject line was stark, clinical, marital dissolution documents. There was no note from Caleb, no personal message, no explanation, just the cold, formal PDF attachment. My hands trembled as I opened the file. I felt as if I was being forcibly ejected from my own story. It was all there, in black and white. Official, legal, irreversible. I was about to lose everything I had spent years trying to maintain. The husband I still loved, the home we had built, the future we had planned. And this time, there was nothing more I could say. The silence was final. In the empty house, My grief was a living entity. It followed me from room to room, a constant, heavy presence. I kept trying to write messages to Caleb. Some I sent, long, rambling pleas. Others I deleted, knowing they were useless. When I saw the read receipts on my texts, followed by hours and then days of silence, a different kind of despair settled in my chest. I was being treated like a stranger, a discarded presence, and as much as I knew I deserved it, as much as I understood the magnitude of the pain I had caused, I still believed I deserved one last chance to explain, to be truly heard. But Caleb didn't want to hear anymore. Not about the reasons, not about the context. For him, the trust was irrevocably broken. The decision was made. Meanwhile, across town, I imagined Liam was living his own story, a detail in my life that had grown into a catastrophe. I learned later, through office gossip, about his own past, about his ex-wife, Megan, who had confessed a betrayal years ago. He hadn't let her explain. He had just told her to pack her things and leave. The irony was suffocating. He, who had condemned another for the very thing he had participated in with me. It was a bitter lesson in the hypocrisy we are all capable of. Just as I began to accept the chilling finality of it all, my body started sending me strange signals. A persistent nausea in the mornings. A profound exhaustion that sleep couldn't fix. A delay that I initially chalked up to stress. But when a week turned into 2, a terrifying, impossible thought began to take root in my mind. I bought a pregnancy test from the pharmacy down the street, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the money out of my wallet. I stood in the bathroom, our bathroom, and stared at the small plastic stick for what felt like an eternity. 2 pink lines. Not a beacon of hope, but the confirmation of a beautiful, terrible complication. My first reaction was pure, unadulterated panic. My second was an immense, hollow void. This child, the very idea of which had sent me into a spiral of fear and pushed me toward my greatest mistake, was now a reality, and it was coming into a world that was already broken. I didn't know what to do. The fear of Caleb thinking this was some desperate, manipulative attempt at reconciliation paralyzed me, but at the same time, hiding it would mean repeating the very mistake, the mistake of silence, an omission that had cost me everything. So, I took a deep breath, marshaled what little courage I had left, and decided to reach out to him through his lawyer. When I told him, through the sterile medium of our attorneys, he agreed to meet. We sat in a neutral ground coffee shop, the air thick with unspoken words. When I confirmed it in person, he looked at me with a mixture of shock and deep, cutting suspicion. He didn't react with anger. His face was a mask of careful control, but he made his needs clear. I need certainty, he said, his voice level. I'll request a DNA test. It can be done during the pregnancy. It was a scalpel to my heart. The mistrust, the clinical demand for proof. But I looked at the man I had shattered, and I understood. I had given him every reason to doubt me. Okay, I whispered, swallowing my pride. I understand. We went to a specialized clinic. It was a cold, impersonal experience. A non-invasive prenatal test. They drew a blood sample from my arm and compared the fragments of the baby's DNA circulating in my bloodstream with Caleb's genetic material. The process was quick, scientific, and utterly devoid of emotion. The results came back in a week. We met in the clinic's waiting room to open the envelope together. My heart pounded against my ribs. He tore it open, his expression unreadable. He scanned the document, and then his eyes found the conclusion. It was there, in stark, undeniable print. The words I already knew in my soul, and that he needed to see confirmed. Probability of paternity, 99.9%. The baby was his. I watched his face, searching for a flicker of joy, of relief, of anything. But there was nothing. He didn't celebrate. His tone didn't change. He folded the paper neatly and looked at me, his eyes clear and resolute. I understand my responsibility as a father, he said, his voice firm. I will support the child. I will be there for the pregnancy, for whatever is needed. He took a breath. But regarding you and me, Eliza, nothing has changed. The marriage is over, I just nodded, the tears I refused to shed burning behind my eyes. I wasn't asking for anything more. I had no right to. I just wanted my child to be loved. The following months were a strange dance of proximity and distance. True to his word, Caleb was present. He began attending some of my doctor's appointments. He'd sit in the waiting room, a few chairs away, scrolling through his phone. In the examination room, he'd stand quietly in the corner, listening to the doctor's updates, watching the grainy black and white image of our child on the ultrasound screen. We barely spoke. Our conversations were purely logistical. The next appointment is on the 15th. Do you need a ride? The doctor said you need more iron. He offered to help with whatever I needed, and even though the gestures were still distant, I could see care in them. It wasn't care for me, the woman who had been his wife. It was care for the mother of his child. An invisible barrier remained firmly between us, but for the sake of the baby, he was there. The birth of our daughter, Aurora, changed something inside him. For the first time in nearly a year, I saw Caleb cry. The moment the nurse placed our tiny, screaming daughter in his arms, his carefully constructed walls crumbled. He looked down at her perfect, scrunched-up face, and a feeling he couldn't describe, a powerful, primal love connected with him. He wept silently, tears tracking down his face as he held his daughter. From that moment on, everything began to revolve around her. Observing this man, who was once my husband and was now only the father of my child, I felt a complex mixture of gratitude and a deep, aching pain. He was present, he was careful, he learned to change diapers, to give baths, to soothe her cries in the middle of the night during his visitation times. He was a natural, but with me, he maintained that invisible barrier. We only talked about Aurora, her feeding schedule, her sleep patterns, her first smile. There were no openings for reconciliation, no gestures indicating anything beyond co-parenting, and I understood. I couldn't force what was broken. I had to accept that there are some mistakes that, even if forgiven, still change the landscape of a relationship forever. Time passed. Caleb's visits with Aurora became the rhythm of our new lives. He brought her toys and books. He would get down on the floor and build block towers with her, his laughter filling the apartment, a sound I had dearly missed. He was discovering a new version of himself, one that marveled at each of his daughter's tiny discoveries. The more the bond between father and daughter grew, the more Caleb solidified the idea that true, profound love can arise even after everything else has fallen apart. His relationship with me remained practical, straightforward, but with Aurora, he allowed himself to be whole again, without fear, without reservations. Motherhood transformed me, too. The anxiety, the deep-seated fear of losing my identity that had caused so much destruction, it all gave way to an intense, overwhelming connection with my daughter. I began to understand that being a mother didn't make me less of a woman, less free, or less capable. It simply awakened sides of myself I didn't know existed. A fierce protectiveness, an endless well of patience, a capacity for love that was bigger than any fear I had ever known. It was in this new cycle that I began to rebuild myself, silently, without rush, and with a clarity that hadn't existed before. Caleb and I were on different paths, but we were tied together by a bond that could never be broken. Aurora became the point of balance, the living link that kept us connected, even as we moved in different directions. Life, in its almost ironic way, had offered us both what we had always avoided or feared: a fresh start, only in formats we never could have imagined. One day, picking Aurora up from my apartment, Caleb mentioned he had met someone. He said it casually, a simple statement of fact. Her name was Nora. He told me because he felt it was fair, because she would eventually be a part of Aurora's life. A pang of jealousy, sharp and unexpected, shot through me. It was strange and painful to imagine another woman in his life, in our daughter's life. But as time went on, and I saw how Nora interacted with Aurora during drop-offs, that feeling turned into something else: relief. Nora never tried to take my place. She was kind, respectful, and clearly adored Aurora. She added to our daughter's life, she didn't subtract. And I understood that what mattered most was Aurora's well-being. It taught me that love doesn't need to be exclusive to be true. Time has a way of smoothing the sharpest edges of pain into something more manageable. The years that followed weren't a story of romantic reconciliation, but one of quiet, individual rebuilding. Caleb and Nora formalized their relationship. They did it quietly, without big parties, simply deciding to walk the same path together. They built a home filled with warmth and stability, a life based on truth and complicity. Patrick no longer talked about our past, not out of resentment, but because he had truly, finally, turned the page. Aurora was the living link between everything that had passed and everything that was yet to come, and he cherished that link as if it were the center of his world. She thrived, surrounded by love from two homes, unaware of the storm that had preceded her calm. She had a father who adored her, a stepmother who cared for her, and a mother who had found her purpose in her. As for me, I moved forward in my own way. I didn't rebuild a new romantic relationship. I tried, a few times, but I couldn't seem to trust, couldn't seem to let go enough to build something new. In the quiet moments, I began to accept that, at least for now, my mission was different. I rebuilt myself. I poured my energy into my daughter, into my career, and into my own education. I found a new sense of meaning not in a partner, but in the small, perfect moments with Aurora. It was in her sleepy hugs in the morning, in the sound of her laughter as we read bedtime stories, in the simple, heartfelt, "I love you, Mommy," whispered in the dark. It was in these moments that I found the strength to keep going, to be the mother she deserved. I had good days. I had tough days. But I no longer carried the guilt like a shroud. It was a part of my story, a memory of a profound mistake, but it no longer defined me. I learned to live with the choices I made and the consequences that followed. And even though I never recovered what I lost, that easy love, that shared history with Caleb, I knew my daughter was growing up safe, happy, and surrounded by an abundance of love. Sometimes, that had to be enough. The story that felt like a painful, tragic ending ultimately transformed into a cycle of growth for everyone involved. None of us returned to who we were before the storm. Caleb became a father whose love was his anchor. I became a mother who found her identity not in spite of her role, but because of it. We didn't find our way back to each other. We found our way back to ourselves, on separate paths, illuminated by the light of the same beautiful child. There was no perfect ending, but there was rebuilding. And in the quiet hum of our separate lives, connected forever by our daughter, I finally understood that was what mattered most.